There is a quiet storm inside your mind, thoughts spinning endlessly, circling events, possibilities, and fears, creating a tension you pretend to ignore but cannot truly escape. You tell yourself control exists, that planning, analyzing, and rehearsing will prevent disaster. Yet each thought pulls you deeper into mental loops you cannot fully command. Sometimes it feels productive, even intelligent, yet beneath the surface, anxiety and stress accumulate silently, shaping decisions, sleep, and perception in ways that are invisible to you. What if your mind has been working against you all along, building its own prison while convincing you it is preparing you for safety and success? How often do you realize that overthinking is not solving problems, but quietly reshaping your identity, your priorities, and your perception of reality without permission? And if you continue to chase solutions through thought alone, the mind may only generate more questions, more stress, and a deeper sense of uncertainty waiting to be revealed. This is the point where observation begins, where noticing the patterns of overthinking becomes the doorway to understanding what has been quietly controlling you. And what lies beyond is not calmness as you imagined, but the unsettling truth of how the mind manufactures its own pressure, tension, and illusion of preparation. Imagine a person who meticulously plans every conversation at work, rehearsing words, anticipating objections, and predicting outcomes, believing each thought grants mastery over interactions. Picture someone who reviews past mistakes endlessly, analyzing every choice and response, hoping that understanding the past will prevent future errors, yet feeling mentally exhausted afterward. Another person writes lists upon lists of potential decisions, prioritizing, weighing, and evaluating endlessly, believing that sheer cognitive effort ensures control over circumstances that are inherently uncertain. These moments feel productive, even intelligent, because the mind equates thinking with power, imagining that more analysis equals mastery over outcomes, relationships, and life itself. And yet, beneath the confidence, subtle tension builds as mental loops continue without resolution, revealing that control was never complete. Only the appearance of control existed. The mind thrives on this illusion because it provides a sense of security, a belief that danger can be predicted, discomfort avoided, and mistakes corrected before they occur. Even in quiet moments, the mind rehearses scenarios, imagines conversations, and anticipates judgment, convincing the thinker that observation is the same as control, preparation as the same as mastery. The illusion is reinforced every time overthinking seems to prevent disaster, creating a subtle reward loop where stress feels like vigilance and mental exhaustion masquerades as competence. And this leads to the first crack, where the limits of control become visible, and the mind begins to show its subtle but persistent fallibility. If this is already making sense to you, it means you're starting to notice patterns most people never see. Subscribe, and let's keep exploring how the mind really works. Now, this is where things start to get uncomfortable. Imagine a person who spends hours reviewing a difficult conversation, convinced that rehearsing every word will prevent conflict. Yet the conversation itself unfolds unpredictably, exposing gaps in planning. They feel frustrated, uneasy, and slightly defeated, noticing that mental preparation does not guarantee outcomes, and yet they return to the same pattern, believing effort will eventually succeed. The first crack appears when the mind encounters reality, when outcomes diverge from expectation, revealing that thought alone cannot control events, people, or the flow of circumstances. This realization unsettles deeply, because the illusion of mastery shatters, leaving anxiety, self-doubt, and the uncomfortable awareness that control was always partial, temporary, and often imagined. Even the most careful planning fails to prevent uncertainty, demonstrating that overthinking is not a shield but a trap, reinforcing stress while promising security. It cannot deliver. The crack deepens when repeated failures confirm that effort alone does not determine results, revealing the hidden vulnerability behind the mind's relentless rehearsal and rumination. And once this begins to register consciously, the thinker feels tension between wanting control and recognizing its impossibility, creating internal conflict that fuels further mental loops, which leads naturally into the next stage, where conditioning shows why the mind persists in this exhausting, self-reinforcing cycle. seeking comfort in patterns that no longer serve. Picture someone who, as a child, was praised for caution, careful planning, and anticipating problems, learning early that attention to detail prevents mistakes and earns approval. Another person experiences anxiety when mistakes are noticed, punishment or criticism follows, teaching the brain to avoid uncertainty through mental rehearsal, rumination, and repetitive evaluation of outcomes. The brain internalizes these experiences as rules, forming pathways that favor anticipation, vigilance, and overanalysis, associating cognitive effort with safety, reward, and social acceptance. Over time. Each repetition strengthens neural connections, making overthinking automatic, habitual, and deeply satisfying because it feels like preparation, even when it produces stress rather than control. If you've noticed this in your own life, describe what happened. Someone reading may recognize themselves in it. Overthinking becomes a conditioned response, triggered by uncertainty, discomfort, or perceived risk, reinforcing patterns that feel unavoidable, while masking the fact that stress is a byproduct of the brain's reward system. The mind interprets repeated mental rehearsal as success, reinforcing pathways that encourage evaluation, prediction, and caution, creating cycles where anxiety feels productive and tension feels necessary. Even minor decisions activate these neural patterns, prompting prolonged deliberation, analysis, and mental simulations that consume attention, energy, and emotional bandwidth without altering outcomes substantially. Conditioning explains why the brain craves these behaviors, why tension feels purposeful, and why stopping overthinking feels unnatural or threatening to perceived safety. And once you see this, the next layer becomes clear, revealing the hidden payoff that makes stress feel rewarding and overthinking difficult to release naturally. Overthinking carries a subtle reward, an emotional payoff that disguises itself as preparation, vigilance, and intelligence, convincing the mind that effort equals control and safety. Even when stress dominates, there is ego satisfaction in imagining that careful planning and mental rehearsal protect against failure, making tension feel purposeful, meaningful, and even noble, while quietly draining energy and peace. The mind associates discomfort with competence, teaching that anxiety and worry signal responsibility, engagement, and seriousness, rewarding effort with perceived self-worth, even as it produces exhaustion and inner friction. Overthinking provides a sense of importance, creating the illusion that the thinker is doing something meaningful, productive, or responsible, masking the reality that the behavior often maintains stress unnecessarily. This payoff is rarely conscious, experienced as subtle pride or diligence, yet it reinforces loops of rumination, replaying events, and predicting outcomes, maintaining tension while avoiding the unknown and unexpected. Even failure can reinforce the cycle, because overthinking produces insight, partial solutions, or prevention of obvious mistakes, confirming the mind's belief that constant attention is protective and essential. The hidden payoff explains why letting go feels uncomfortable, why silence, simplicity, or inaction creates unease, and why the mind clings to repetition, analysis, and hypothetical outcomes for perceived safety. And as this payoff becomes recognized, it sets the stage for the identity trap, where overthinking is no longer behavior but a defining feature, inseparable from self-perception and value. Imagine a person who has long identified as the careful one, the planner, or the thinker, seeing overanalysis as proof of responsibility, intelligence, and moral diligence. They notice stress, exhaustion, and mental loops, yet abandoning overthinking feels like losing part of their identity, as if letting go undermines competence, safety, and self-worth simultaneously. Over time, rumination, worry, and mental rehearsal become entwined with self-image, so that stopping feels not only unfamiliar but dangerous, threatening the very definition of who they believe themselves to be. The identity trap reinforces the pattern, teaching the mind that constant evaluation and anticipation are essential to being reliable, intelligent, or conscientious, making relaxation or presence feel almost impossible. If you've noticed this in your own life, describe what happened. Someone reading may recognize themselves in it. This self-reinforcement maintains overthinking even when it produces suffering, linking mental tension to self-esteem, social identity, and perceived responsibility in ways that feel unavoidable and rational. The trap is subtle, internalized, and persistent, making the cycle of analysis, prediction, and stress appear necessary, moral, or even virtuous, reinforcing itself across situations and time. And understanding this identity dimension prepares the mind for the reframe, where perception shifts, the payoff is recognized, and overthinking can be observed rather than defended as self. You begin to see overthinking not as a flaw, but as a conditioned habit, a learned response that once served safety. Now extending tension beyond usefulness. Quietly the mind can be observed without judgment, noticing how patterns of analysis, anticipation, and worry arise, giving insight into their origin rather than demanding immediate correction or control. Each mental loop becomes data, an opportunity to understand how stress was reinforced, how anxiety masqueraded as preparation, and how perception was shaped by invisible rewards and payoffs. The thinker begins to perceive the difference between thought as observation and thought as reaction, noticing when mental rehearsal serves insight and when it merely perpetuates tension. Reframing allows a subtle shift, where the focus is on awareness rather than elimination, where observation replaces resistance, and insight quietly replaces urgency in the mind's processing. You recognize that emotions, tension, and anticipation are signals, not failures, providing information about priorities, fears, and patterns without demanding action, solution, or judgment in each moment. The mind slowly disentangles identity from overthinking, observing habits as separate from self, understanding that competence, intelligence, and care are not measured by loops of rumination. And once this perspective is integrated, the quiet realization emerges. Awareness itself is a form of mastery, a presence in thought that reduces stress without forcing control. Silence becomes a tool of observation, not avoidance, allowing thoughts to arise, settle, and pass without compulsive engagement or judgment. Leaving a calm clarity beneath the noise, the thinker notices sensations of tension, worry, and anticipation as passing signals, observing their influence on perception and decision-making without needing to act, correct, or suppress them immediately. This quiet shift transforms the relationship with stress, turning mental loops from prison into information, offering clarity about internal patterns without demanding performance, mastery, or intervention at every turn. The mind begins to rest in observation, where awareness itself replaces effort, insight replaces urgency, and the habitual pull of overthinking diminishes into subtle recognition of impermanence. You perceive thought as a landscape rather than a command center, noticing patterns without attachment, understanding that insight emerges from observation and calm emerges from accepting imperfection in process. Each moment of noticing reinforces the ability to step back, allowing tension to exist without consuming energy, giving mental space for clarity, presence, and reflection without struggle or resistance. And as this quiet shift consolidates, the stage is set for the final mirror, where reflection integrates perception, awareness, and emotional insight into a coherent sense of self beyond loops. You look into your own mind and see the patterns you once called failures, loops of worry and tension, noticing them as familiar landscapes, not definitions of self. Each thought, each imagined outcome, each moment of anticipation reflects conditioned responses, subtle payoffs, and identity loops, revealing the mind's complexity and its subtle insistence on control. The mirror shows that overthinking is neither inherently wrong nor permanent, but a learned response that can be observed, understood, and experienced without compulsive engagement or judgment. You recognize that stress, tension, and rumination are not enemies, but indicators, messages about what matters, what is feared, and what the mind has been trained to anticipate. Reflection uncovers the invisible ties between identity and behavior, showing how the self was subtly shaped by repeated patterns, rewards, and anticipatory thinking. Yet these patterns can now be observed. Each moment of observation increases clarity, turning anxiety into information, worry into insight, and loops into gentle reminders of learning, adaptation, and awareness rather than threat. And when you leave the mirror, the mind retains this awareness, seeing tension and thought as data, and presence as the quiet ground beneath habitual mental storms. The mind continues to generate possibilities, outcomes, and scenarios, Yet you begin to notice these without immediate response, stepping back into awareness, observing without needing control or resolution. Overthinking remains, yet its grip diminishes, becoming a tool of insight rather than a source of stress, allowing moments of clarity, calm, and reflection to emerge naturally. Each thought, each loop, each anticipation can now be recognized as part of a landscape, understood without attachment and observed without urgency, integrating awareness into identity quietly and consistently. The quiet presence of observation becomes the anchor, reminding you that thought is not command, tension is not failure, and clarity exists in noticing without needing to act. And as you continue, the mind opens to subtle shifts, where insight emerges from calm observation. Patterns are seen without judgment, and the cycle of stress gently loses its power. Watch, notice, and reflect, allowing the mind to reveal its own structure while maintaining presence, understanding, and a quiet mastery that comes from observation rather than effort.